Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Viva la Evolution. I'm Lori Ashcraft. I'm your host, and speaking to you from Recovery and Resilience Solutions, part of Crestwood Behavioral Health. And if you caught us last week, you'll know that we kind of left off on a conversation about change. Remember, I told you the story about the water bottle and being in the emergency room, and the one guy that stepped out and did something different and it changed the whole room. That's called culture change. And we're going to continue that conversation today. I'm going to just give you the high points of the narrative that's available to you on our webpage, and you'll find this narrative. And the narrative goes into much more depth than we're going to go into on the video, giving you more information on culture change. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to kind of walk you through the high points of that narrative. Then I'm going to show you a little video of Jim and me talking about it, having a conversation about it, and that'll kind of bring it to life a little better. And then I'm going to tell you a story that really kind of pulls all the pieces together. When I first started trying to figure out about culture change, I'll tell you what kind of got my interest is we had created a program where there was just a lot of recovery and resilience in the air. And it was because we were all of one accord working toward creating a setting where people felt safe and comfortable enough to begin their recovery process and then to sustain their recovery process. And people would come in the door and they would say, "What do you do here? What is this place?" And I would try to explain it. And they would say, "Well, it just feels, what's that feeling? What's happening?" So without knowing it, they were picking up on the invisible elements of culture. They were picking up on the vibe that took place between us. And they wanted to know what that was about. So I thought, well, what is this? What are we doing? What is this stuff we're up to? So, I don't know what to do. So I read a bunch of books, all good books. There's some good books out there on culture change. Also, part of my training is in organization development. So I knew about these books. I'd already read a lot of them, but I went back and kind of flipped through them, looked through them, and all good stuff. But when it came to okay, how do I apply this stuff? It sort of broke down because it was like academic things, and well, I got to find a better way to understand this. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go around to different organizations, kind of hang out a little bit, and see what causes good culture and not so good culture. So I did that. And before I went, I thought, okay, where am I going to look? So I thought, well, I don't know, maybe the policies and procedures. So I looked through a lot of policy and procedure manuals. I can tell you that's not where the culture is. That's kind of a bunch of rules that nobody looks at unless the auditor's coming, and then we kind of want to line ourselves up with what we say we're going to do, so we look at those books again. Long story short, you're not going to figure out how to have a recovery culture, by looking at policies and procedures. So I thought, well, okay, maybe it's the buildings. Maybe if you have a really nice building, then it'll be easier for people to recover and gain resilience there. Nope, not so. I looked at some really nice buildings where nothing about recovery was happening. And I looked at some really kind of not so nice buildings, and they were really strong in recovery. Now, I'll just a little qualifier here. If you have a strong recovery culture, it'll be reflected in your building because you'll want to create a space that is respectful of people and where they feel safe and comfortable. But it's not where it starts, and it can't hold a culture. It can just reflect it if it's already there. So, not there, not in the buildings. Well, where was it then? Was there outside space that people could enjoy? Would that help? Yes, that helps a lot. But again, some programs looked like concrete all over the place, yet they had a strong recovery culture. Next, I thought, well, vision and mission statements, values. That's where organizations write down what's important to them. I'm going to check those out. I read some of the most glowing, inspiring vision and mission statements. The problem was, what was talked about there wasn't happening in the program. So it wasn't there. I mean, again, if you start with recovery in the right place and it's in your culture, it'll be reflected in the mission and vision. But you can't write the vision and mission and not have it and think that it's going to fix everything. Not there. It took me a while to realize that the culture starts inside of each person. It's in our hearts. And when we get in our hearts the right stuff around recovery and resilience, and we all agree on that and we start pulling ourselves together around, then we'll have a recovery culture. So that's the key to it. That's where it's hidden. And that's where we got to draw from if we're really going to have a strong recovery culture. You'll hear Jim and I talk a little bit about this. So let's go to the video now of Jim and me talking, and you'll hear some of this. So here we go. Here's the video.
Hey there, Lori.
Hi, Jim.
So what is recovery culture and why is it important?
You know, that is a really good question, and it's a question on the lips of many people right now. I've been hearing it a lot. And I think what's happening is people are realizing that they can't just make a program change and think it's going to work in isolation. But the whole context of that change has to cooperate and incubate that idea. And we call that recovery culture. It's another way to say environment, but it's deeper than environment. So that question's coming up a lot lately is, what is culture? Where is it? And you know, if you start just thinking culture, we think we know what we're talking about.
Right.
But then you have to ask yourself, where is it? And I started this quest about 20 years ago, trying to figure this out. And at first I thought, well, you know, if you have the right kind of building, it'll set the tone for recovery. But then I would find that some really nice looking buildings had nothing to do with recovery. And some really dumpy buildings may or may not promote recovery in a cultural sort of way. So it wasn't the building. It wasn't the landscaping. Was it policies and procedures? So believe it or not, I, who don't like either, and often don't know what they mean, isn't that a sad statement, and can't stand to read them, I started looking at people's policies and procedures. And then I would look at their practices. And sometimes they would have these nice policies and procedures that seemed very recovery oriented, but they weren't doing any of it. So the policies and procedures alone did not hold the culture in a way that sustained recovery. Wasn't there. So not in bricks and mortar, not in landscaping, not in policies, procedures. Mission statement. Started reading people's mission statements and their visions. I read some really inspiring mission statements But when I looked at what people were doing, there was no connection. So you can have a wonderful mission statement and a lovely vision statement, but you may not be doing any of that. It's as though someone wrote it for you, and you kept doing what you were doing.
Right.
So it wasn't there. It wasn't in any of the places that I looked. And I don't know how I figured this out. I think perhaps by the process of elimination, that it was inside the people. And I wrote this statement. I brought it so I could read it to you. I wrote this statement 16 years ago when I was deep into this quest. And I say, we are the organisms that make up an organization. Root word the same, organ, right? Organization, organism. So it's this group of organisms that make up an organization. So we are the organisms that make up the organization. We are the living, breathing element that keeps the organizational heart beating. Within each of us is where the transformation happens. Then it's reflected outward into the mission and vision and values, the bricks and mortar, the policies and procedures that hold the organization together. So in other words, if we're going to change a culture, we have to figure out how to impact and influence the heart of each individual. Then that change will reflect outward into everything else. That's where the culture is.
Wonderful.
Hidden. Hidden someplace that you would never look.
What are some of the ways that a recovery culture shows up in the people, in the community of persons that are there, in the organisms that are within that organization?
Yeah. Well, it's a little different. I mean, I hate to just nail it down,
Sure.
because it's a living, breathing process. But the basics are not much fear going on. Not much fear going on. A willingness to try new things. A willingness to fail. So we're talking risk here. Take risk, an openness to risk. Some transparency around, we may or may not know what we're doing, but we're going to keep learning and growing and watching ourselves evolve. You would see that. It may be reflected in the bricks and mortar. I find recovery cultures usually start looking better because they have a respect for the people they're serving.
Right.
And out of that respect, they create a better place for people to be served.
Right.
Sometimes there's gardening and landscaping going on. That's a natural healing process. It gets, and people don't just go, oh, let's do this. It's a natural outflowing of creating a healing space. So those are some key things. Eventually, it starts to impact the policies and procedures, which are more related to customized services around each person, flexibility around doing that, creativity, looking for new ways to do things. I would start with that. That would be what I'd think I'd see initially.
And when you talk about fear and risk sharing, those are for both staff and the people we serve.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it kind of usually starts with the leader. If the leader sets the tone, then the staff watch that role modeling and they're more comfortable in doing some of that. And then without saying a word or trying to treat anybody, the people being served see that in the staff. And so it's just this constant reflection of learning and growing together.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. It's a very respectful process.
And I like the idea of policies, procedures, guidelines being adapted to a recovery culture, because a lot of times they're written from the perspective of risk avoidance.
Exactly, exactly.
And when we can incorporate all that, the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
The love, the relationship, the heart stuff, then we can start to soften our policies and procedures to reflect that.
Yes. You know, when we first started doing recovery services in Phoenix, Gene said to me, well, you're going to have policies and procedures. So he gave me the policies and procedures book to look at. And I just have no patience. I mean, I know they're necessary, but I'm not, my brain doesn't work that way.
Right.
So I said, you know what? If we try to fit into that, we're not going to be us. We're not going to be new. We're just going to be a rehash of what's old. I'd like to just start and see what happens, and then make policies and procedures around what happens, instead of making what happens fits into them. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And we did that. And so whenever something would happen, I'd write a letter about it. I probably can't think of any, but I can think of one. We had new carpeting. And I had said to people, let's try to keep this clean. Let's not spill and dribble our, and mostly I'm talking to myself because I'm a real dribble spiller type of person. And so let's all try really hard not to mess up our new carpet. What happens if somebody starts dribbling and spilling? So of course, folks are saying back what they've been told. Well, they can't have their coffee in here.
Right.
They can't, they can't just, so no, take it to another level. What would we say? What would we do? Well, we tell them to get out. No. What? Let's back up a little bit more. And so we got to the point of saying, if somebody starts spilling stuff, we're going to say, we just noticed that you spill some things. Can we help you with that? I mean, do you want a lid for your coffee, or what would help you? And the reason is, we're just trying to keep our new carpet clean. Always give a reason. If you're making a rule, give a reason. And then, it needs to be cleaned up right. Then you say, clean it up? No. You say, come on, let's go get the cleaning material, and I'll show you how to clean it up in case it happens again. So that became a policy and a procedure. Just an example. So you can see there's a whole lot packed into that.
Right.
About relationship and respect and learning and that's that. Do you see how that emulates a culture right there? That little tiny practice around the carpet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and both things can be true. The carpet, you want a nice environment.
Yeah.
That can be true.
Us. Yeah.
That you want to maintain that nice carpet, the nice environment written larger, right?
Yeah.
And you want to empower people to, support that.
Right. The people who already know not to spill their stuff, it's their place.
Right.
Let's keep it nice.
Yes.
And let's invite the new people in so we can all keep it nice.
Wonderful.
Yeah. It actually
Great
worked
example.
out pretty well.
That's a great example. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned earlier that, the recovery culture can be reflected in a vision and mission statement, but it's not necessarily
Right. Yeah.
true
Can't
that.
trust it.
Yeah, you can't trust it. I like that. So, what was your organization's vision and mission statement
Well,
like?
I'll tell you, when we started, we weren't any more recovery oriented than anybody else. We had a lot of work to do. So we looked at our mission statement, and it was awful. It was all about us being the best at what we do. Nothing about being effective for people we served, nothing about relationship, nothing about the person actually getting better. It was all about us.
Sure.
Being good and being admired and having all our ducks in a row. And our CEO, Gene, he said, I just remember going, yuck. So we rewrote it. And I was just trying to remember what it was. I wrote it down here. Let me try to read it. It went something like this, but it was shorter than this because I remember we put it on the back of our business cards. So it was something like this: to create opportunities and environments that inspire people to recover, to succeed in accomplishing their goals, and to reconnect with themselves, others, and meaning and purpose in their lives. That became our mission statement.
That's
and that worked for years. We kept rechecking, is that still what we want to do? And yeah, that's still a good one.
That's a wonderful mission
Yeah,
statement.
yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So, Lori, I have just one last question for you. What was your biggest aha moment?
Well, I would say there were two of them. The first one we'll talk about now, and the second one we'll talk in depth in part 2 of this series.
Okay, great.
The first one is that it wasn't so much what we were doing as in what we were being, who we were being. This gets back to changing us in order to change the culture. So this might sound fairly simple, but it was very difficult to stop and question ourselves about the way we did, who we were being, and how we were doing our business. Were we being kind? Were we being respectful? Were we being curious? Were we being creative? Or were we just going through the motions? And we started challenging each other, not in a scoldy way, but in a remindy way around how are we being with each other. So it was, how are we being with each other, staff? How are we being with the people we're serving? How are we being with our boss? And how are we being with outside customers? Making that shift was huge, and it had an enormous impact on our culture. And just to kind of revisit this whole idea of culture, I think the reason it's become a question on everybody's mind these days is because we've had enough failure introducing new things without creating a container that would support it. Peer support's an example of that. People go out and train peers, they hire them someplace where nobody's been trained about recovery or what peers do. They're not prepared to give peers a job in what they do. They end up giving them stupid jobs. And it doesn't work. So if we can back up and fix the way we're being, then we have a container that can accept new creative ideas and nurture and incubate them. That's why it's so important. That was my one big aha, is it's in here. It's not out there, it starts in here and it goes out there.
I like that. And I heard a talk last week where the person was talking about their recovery, and they said it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It's simple, but it's not easy. It takes
Yeah.
a lot of work and
Yeah.
dedication to the concept.
Yeah, it's personal.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second biggest aha, maybe not bigger than that, but big, was adding peers to the workforce. And what happened is I'll tell you more about this in that part too, but what happened is as we added peers to the workforce, they started questioning us. Why are we doing it that way? Why don't we try this? That wouldn't have worked for me, this would work for me. And we listened and we started doing what they suggested. And that evolved us dramatically. So I would say those are the two things. In part 2, I want to talk a lot more about peer support and how it changed us, how it changed people becoming peers, how it changed the people they worked with, how it changed our community. It was an amazing evolutionary process.
Well, I look forward to part 2.
Okay, me too.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Now I'm going to tell you a story that kind of locks in what I've been telling you about. And I first heard this story, oh gosh, I'm going to think maybe 10 years ago. It's the kind of story that gets told in like trainings or consultations where somebody's trying to help you understand how to change. And uh, my videographer, Christopher Martin, pointed it out to me about 10 years ago when I was working on culture change. And he said, Lori, I think you're going to like this. So I looked at it, and I was blown away by it. And then I realized it had 24 million views, so I wasn't the only one blown away by it. So I'll just tell you the story. So it goes like this. Oh, and this is on video, and I'm going to put a little link in so you can see the video if you want. It's only 3 minutes long. It feels a lot longer, but it's only 3 minutes long if you want to see it. So the first thing in the video you see are a bunch of people out kind of in a meadow, and they're picnicking. And it looks like a bunch of people picnicking. They're all eating and they're talking and they're having fun, and little kids are running around, and it just looks good. And then out of nowhere, this one picnicker stands up, and he has a boombox, and he starts playing this wild music, and then he starts dancing to it. And frankly, when I first saw this, I kind of felt embarrassed for him. Like, oh, and he's not the kind of guy that you'd want to get up and dance with. And it's not like a waltz, He's just all over the place. He's having a great time. And he's kind of beckoning to other people. Come on, join me. Of course, nobody does because they're just thinking, woohoo, hope this isn't going to last very long. But it does. It just seems to last a lot. Again, it's only 3 minutes, but it seemed to me like it lasted a long time because I'm feeling uncomfortable for this guy. Then a second dancer gets up and starts dancing with the first dancer. Then we got two dancers going on, and they're both dancing this crazy dance. And this seems to go on for quite a while. But if you look at the audience now, they're kind of noticing what's happening because there's two dancers now. You could kind of ignore one, but two, that second dancer sort of validated the first guy. Then the third dancer gets up. And it turns out that the third dancer, who's not any different than the first two, other than he's the third one, is the tipping point. Because once the third dancer gets up, almost everybody gets up and starts dancing. In fact, when you see the video, you'll see some people like running to join the dance. So it's just an amazing phenomenon, and I think it's probably true in a lot. You don't have to be at a picnic for this to happen. The idea is that once the third person joins the conversation or the dance, other people feel like they can join too. So here, let me just kind of end this with a question for us. What if one of us was that first dancer? What if one of us had the courage to stand up and dance when everyone else is sitting down? And to keep dancing by yourself until someone joins you. That's where change starts. So what if you're the second person that gets up? You like the music? You think you can do the dance? So you get up. Now there's two people dancing. And what you've done is you've validated the first dancer and you've validated the music. Then, what if you're the third dancer that gets up? The third dancer opens the door for everybody to join the dance. What if you're the third dancer? What if you three dancers now are the people who can make the change begin? So let's keep this in our minds during this next week about, wow, what would it feel like to be the first dancer or the second dancer or the third dancer? And do we have the courage to stand up and dance? Do we? That's where change begins. So that's it for today. See you back here next week. Next week, Jim and I will continue the conversation, and we're going to look at 3 other things that go along with this early stage of culture shift. One is resistance. I can just promise you, if you're going to suggest change, you're going to get resistance. And the way I like to look at this is when you start to bring about a change, there's going to be what I call resonators, those who have wanted to dance all along and just didn't know where to get started, or resistors. And the resistors are the people who are going, no, 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 me, no, no, not me. I don't dance. And I don't dance to that kind of music. And I'm just going to stay over here at the edge of the picnic. I might even leave because this dance is not my dance. So how are we going to bring the resonators together in a way that's powerful and eventually call in the resistors? I can tell you, resistors often turn out to be the best dancers. It just takes them a little while, so you can't discount them. So we're going to look at that next week. We're going to look at the power of bringing peers in. Because if you bring peers into your culture, on your workforce, you're going to change, and you're going to change for the better. Peers are a powerful influence on recovery culture. They can help you with that so much. And then finally, we're going to look at your shadow. Where do you keep your organization's shadow? And how can we start bringing that shadow out and learn from it and give it a better place to live? So join us next week. Can't wait to see it. And we'll continue. Thanks for joining us.